So last week we talked about sort of baby steps to becoming a real bodhisattva. And this week I'd like to expand upon that. And the way that gets expanded out is to the entire path of the bodhisattva, our path to enlightenment. And these are formulated in Buddhism as sixfold. And the first of the six is the Paramita of perfection of generosity. Now, I think that you probably have a pretty good idea that the Bodhisattva is altruistic, right? That means they're like really big-hearted and selfless. And so giving seems natural, right? It's an obvious example of how you would behave if you were a selfless person. But what I'm using here is Gampopa's Jewel Ornament of Liberation. It's a Kagyu text. Kagyus are one of the four main traditions of Tibetan Buddhism. And Gampopa was the founder of the Karma Kagyu school of Buddhism and monastic Kagyu practice. And great, and it's just a great book at bringing together in a totally organized fashion all the aspects of, I'd say specifically the Bodhisattva path. That's what I use it for. It's how to spell out in details how we conduct ourselves as bodhisattvas, how we meditate, how we gain wisdom. So let's get into it. So what would you imagine that, welcome to anybody who's here. I think we have maybe one person, maybe, yeah. And what would you imagine that a bodhisattva, selfless and big-hearted, would give? What would they give and how would they give? You can throw it in the comments box if you want. There's three kinds of giving. Try to guess what they are. In the meantime, we can start talking about the most obvious one, which is your wealth and possessions, right? So regarding your wealth and this sort of obvious form of giving of our stuff and our money and so forth, there's a pure way of giving and an impure way of giving. And, some of this we want to really refine all of our conduct and acts as bodhisattvas, aspiring bodhisattvas on the path. And some of the ways that Gampopa spells this out, and he's just drawing from the sutra material from the Buddha, is obvious, and some of it is subtle. So let's see what's obvious, because you could probably guess. So an impure way of giving would be to give, in order to harm people, right? So say you give somebody a bomb that'll go off later on, or you give somebody something in order to gain fame and recognition for yourself, to make yourself, to compete with other people. That would be ridiculous. And also, then at a more subtle level, there's this idea, particularly in heritage Buddhist communities, that, by practicing generosity, you'll have a better rebirth. And so to even think that way is not a bodhisattva way of thinking, like with being reborn in the human realms with more money. I'm going to give you this so that happens. So that's not a right way of giving. And then another thing is to use some impure, give things that are impure. So what don't you want to give? You don't want to give weapons to people so they can harm each other, right? Giving, or they might harm themselves. So, there's a famous story from Dylan Thomas. Every Christmas we used to listen to Dylan Thomas's a record of him telling Christmas stories. He was a great poet. And he was very funny. So he told a story about one Christmas, with some mysterious way, he got a hatchet for Christmas, all wrapped up, and nobody would claim. It wasn't like, didn't have a card on it, so it was unclaimed who gave it to him. And it was like his, whole family freaked out that he was given this dangerous object, but it was like the coolest thing he'd ever been given. So from his point of view. But from a Bodhisattva point of view, you might not want to give a sharp hatchet to a little boy, right? You also don't want to give skills for hunting and harming sentient beings, anything that's going to cause them to accumulate, a negative karmic trajectory. And also, you don't want to be stingy and give some little, if you're a wealthy person, give some little doodad to somebody. You really want to give generously. So if you can afford more, do it. And then there's who do you want to give to? Well, you don't want to give to really intensely evil or negative people. Say no animals are really intensely evil or negative. And you don't want to give them to people who have some kind of mental problem where they're going to harm others or harm themselves again. Like that's the wrong kind of recipient for a gift. And you also don't want to give it to gluttons. That was an interesting comment, I thought, like people who are like giving food to people who are just, going to eat it like ravenous animals, which might be me, especially around the time of this time of year, right? Then there's an impure method of giving, and you don't want to. You want to have a really pure mind when you give, and not be thinking nasty things about the other person. You don't want to be, giving in a dismissive or degrading way to another person. You don't want to, for example, like be scolding homeless people about they shouldn't be out here begging for money. You give them some money, but it's with that attitude, really bad attitude. So that kind of thing makes sense. But, each time you go through one of these, I was finding today that I was reflecting on my own conduct. Here in the Bodhisattva way, your motivation is just as important as your outer conduct. And so there's other forms of Buddhism where it's just all about your conduct, really. But in the Bodhisattva way, it's a little bit more introspective. So you want to give purely, right? And how do you give purely? Well, a pure offering inwardly would be giving a body part to somebody. And that was back in the days, 2,000 years ago, when this list was originally laid out in the sutras. There was no way to give a body part without harm coming to you, right? Or without you actually losing that part. And, I don't know if anybody else could even utilize your body parts, right? But there's this feeling of if you had the capacity to give without regret and with a really pure mind to someone, a body part, that is like really awesome. And so nowadays we do have that opportunity. We can give a kidney to somebody. And that is an example while we're still alive. Are there other opportunities for donation? Yeah, you can give bone marrow. You can give blood. These kind of offerings are just really primo. But only if you keep a really pure mind about it and you aren't, complaining about it in your mind. So, the next another category is like outer things, like food, drink, clothes, automobiles, your family members. Now, of course, they will go on to say that they have to be willing. And then monks have there's something they can't give away. They can't give away their clothes. They can't give away their 3 garments that they always have. well, then we'd have naked monks running around. That wouldn't be viewed very positively in society, would it? Yeah, so what are the pure recipients? Well, you want to give to the 3 jewels. So there's the sort of upper offerings, and that would be like offering things on your shrine, fruit and flowers and water offerings and milk and, you name it, is placed on the shrine and offered. And that's sure, it's an outward offering, and Buddhas and Bodhisattvas don't have their own needs and wants. So you're not like giving, they're not going, oh boy, I got flowers today. It's really about your heart, how as I said, Lori, if that's you on there today, if I said to a friend of mine the other day, when you make an offering, when you place your offerings on the shrine, imagine how you imagine the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, the enlightened beings and the beings on the path to enlightenment. And then you get that feeling, when you give like that. And it's a really uplifted feeling. It's changing your consciousness. So mainly, from the Mahayana path on up, we're looking at how our acts shape our trajectory, shaping our consciousness. On the lowest level, we're shaping our consciousness so that, and thus we will have a fortunate rebirth, but we're not thinking that way. But this process is shaping that within the realms of sentient beings without enlightenment. But ultimately, if every time you uplift yourself, and particularly if you can offer, we'll talk about the pure method of offering that will enable it to become an activity that can create enlightenment. In fact, according to the Bodhisattva path, without perfecting your generosity, you cannot gain pure and perfect Buddhahood or an awakening. Isn't that interesting? So it's the first of the 6 perfections, and one might view it as superficial, but it's not superficial. It's very deeply transformative. So the recipients can be the triple gems and your spiritual masters. They can be people that are helpful to you, like your parents. They can be those suffering people, so patients in the hospital, unprotected people, giving at the food bank and so forth. And they can also be harmers and destructive kind of beings. And you're giving in order to pacify them. So these 4 classes of beings are similar to the 4 that are outlined in the texts on our various Vajrayana or Tibetan Buddhist practices for the 4 classes of guests, we'll call them. The upper being the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. In that case, the second category is the protectors, these valiant beings who have sworn their life energy, all their activities to protect the Dharma practitioners and never harm any sentient being. And they're often practitioners on the path like us. But anyway. And then, all sentient beings, suffering in samsara. And then these harmers, these ne'er-do-well kind of gods and demons who, particularly ones we have a connection to from our karma, past life, hurting somebody or something. This connection is created. It's a negative connection with other beings who become our enemies. And so it's important to give all these classes of beings. And what is this method that makes us pure? This giving of generosity. Well, there's one thing that is, it seeing is because we've got some kind of at least rudimentary understanding of emptiness. The more we understand and more we get a visceral experience of emptiness, what that even connotes, then the more that this whole act of giving can lead to enlightenment. So if we're thinking, I'm empty, there is no self here, there's really no identity here, and this object I'm giving, if you look at it, you can't really find any there. And then if you go take it further and you look at the recipient, they too are empty of any inherent existence. And in that way, really becomes a really best offering. And another way of putting it is that what makes them pure is that they're supported by emptiness and they're supported by compassion. So supported by emptiness means we understand the emptiness of the inner body, of our body. We understand the emptiness of the wealth. We understand the emptiness of our subjective mind. This me and you and all the self-grasping and all the storyline we tell about ourselves. It isn't really true. And then it's supported by the emptiness of the Dharma of Enlightenment. I'm not even sure what that really means. Dharma means so many different things, but the Dharma, I think what they're saying is the teaching themselves, you know. There really isn't a there with them either. There's nothing to find if you go looking for the reality, the objective reality of Dharma itself. So with these four emptiness, understandings of emptiness, the gift you give isn't going to loop you back into being really connected with samsara or cyclic existence. Now, the other aspect is compassion. So we've been talking about that, haven't we? So compassion is this feeling of not being able to bear the suffering of sentient beings, living beings. So you have to give. That's very, very beautiful. So these together, the emptiness side and the compassion side, in a way, that's what our whole path is about. And it's definitely about how to perfect involved in perfecting your giving. So, we talked about giving wealth a little bit. Yeah, we're still talking about giving wealth. So you give for enlightenment. Your motivation is for enlightenment for everyone equally, and your motivation is compassion. You give what's the word is translated as devotion, but what that means is you give. You're happy before you give. You say, "Oh boy, I get to offer this. I get to give this." And then when you're making the offer, your mind is totally clear and sort of non-conceptual. It's free. And then afterwards, you don't say, "Oh, I shouldn't have given that away." Well, okay, so that totally ruins it if you're going to regret it after you give it, right? So another thing is that you give respectfully. You give with your own hands, if possible. You know, sometimes with charities in our country, we aren't literally giving with our own hands, but maybe it's more virtuous to go and work in the food bank. For example, in Alameda County, there is, here in where I live, the county where I live, there is work done sorting food. And of course, there's always soup kitchens and so forth for giving to people who need it. It's very beautiful. And yeah, so like that. So then the right time, you should give at the right time when you have enough money to give, when you have enough wealth to give. But sometimes, I'm going to disagree with Gampopa here a little bit. It's been the most meaningful sometimes when you have nothing to give. In my life, when I was really in the pits financially, I would get dollar coins and give them away to homeless people, because I really only had a few dollars left. I tried, like, fortunately I knew there was more on the way, like the paycheck was going to come in a week or so, and I had cereal on the shelf. But those times, that giving, because it's so generous, it really raises you up, raises up your consciousness. And yeah, so I'm bragging about it years later, so I'm destroying it, because I'm trying to, say, oh, aren't I wonderful? So that's not very respectable. So don't be like me. Then you never want to give into it's going to harm others. That's clear. And you also don't want to harm the people around you. So if you're going to give something and your family's going to be really upset by it that you gave it away, that's not a good idea. And then you can't give something that you stole, and ill-gotten gains, and taking what wasn't given. And you want to give repeatedly. That's the best. And then you want to give impartially. And you want to give what people want, or what animals want. They don't want to give something that's useless or what you think would be good for them. All right, so that's a little bit of the method, the pure method. Oh, I never really said what the other kinds of giving were. So there's wealth, the 3 kinds of giving: wealth, fearlessness, and giving the Dharma, the teachings of Dharma of Buddhism. So let's talk about giving fearlessness. What does that mean even? That means you're giving protection from harm. So you take every time you see a little insect that's clearly going to be washed down the drain when you take a shower, and you take that spider and you take it outside, that's protecting it from harm, right? And then all the way up to you bring in a refugee into your home, or like really high level giving was people during the Nazi era, and there's been many eras where people did similar things, bringing in Jewish people and hiding them in their homes and placing themselves in danger by doing that. That is really primo Bodhisattva activity. And then giving Dharma. So this is an interesting topic. I found this very interesting because I'm giving Dharma right now. I'm trying to give Dharma right now as best I can. Oh, look at this. I had a pen mishap. So first of all, when you're giving Dharma, and all of us are giving Dharma by being examples of Dharma, right? Being examples of Bodhisattva's activities and conduct in the lives of people. So that's one way I would say we're giving Dharma. If we're formally giving Dharma teachings, you always want to give it to people who want it. You're not lecturing people who are uninterested in Dharma. And you want to give it to people who respect the Dharma and Dharma teachers. So there's a lot of people who don't in our society, so be aware of that. And then you don't want to, I think this is, we can extrapolate from the generous big heart of the Bodhisattva, that you don't want to be giving Dharma teachings out because you want to become a very important person, a prestigious person, get a lot of praise from people, get status, wealth. That's kind of a totally inappropriate motivation for teaching the Dharma. And you want to be motivated by this feeling of compassion. You can't bear the suffering of others. This is really important. And this will naturally rise up in you as you practice meditation also. And you want to teach without errors, that's why we use these outlines brought to us by the masters of the past, because we don't want to make mistakes. Bring our own non-Dharma views into the Dharma. This is a real problem. So we need to study before we're going to teach something, to teach it well. And you want to be logical, and you want to be able to, the person who's receiving the teaching, to come away from the teaching that you've given, knowing how to put it into practice, right? And here I'm noticing at 6:25, that made me look at the clock. I'm always trying to finish by 6:30. I always seem to be going to 6:35, but let's see what we can do. And interestingly, you don't say, when somebody says that you don't know, asks you for a Dharma teaching, you don't say, oh yeah, right, oh, here you go, let me tell you about that, blah, blah, blah. First you say, I haven't studied that in detail. I thought that, you know. So there's two reasons for that, it seems like, according to Gampopa, that as I understand this book in translation. One is that you really haven't studied that in detail. Even if you've done it a long time ago, you need to refresh your mind. But you should always be studying before you give a Dharma teaching. Yeah, to make it the best you can, really perfect it. And then the other thing is you're examining the student to see, are they going to be somebody, like it was said before, that respects the Dharma and Dharma teachers, or do they have some other motivation, you know? So you want to get to know them a little bit before you jump in and teach them what they ask for. Once you know someone well, then you can give teachings without being requested, just because you know that they need it, and you know that they want it, and they're respectful. So the place that you give teaching should be clean, and it's right in the sutras that the teacher should sit on a throne. Isn't that interesting? At least that's the term as it came into Tibetan and then into English. It may have been a raised dais, or I'm not sure what, like Pali or Sanskrit or Indian languages, what throne meant, and it should be decorated with silks and all that. So you see that in the Tibetan tradition, and I'm not sure. I need to look at the way that the teachers are featured on other traditions. You should be well dressed, clean, neat, and behave yourself gently. There's a mantra to recite. Actually, it's like a dharani. You recite when I never seen a lama do this. A long dharani, many Sanskrit syllables that you say when you're like approaching, you're going to sit down on the throne, and it keeps delusion, Mara, at bay while you're giving the teaching. I really want to ask a lama now if they ever recite this dharani. So then, you want the teaching to be on target, related to the subject at hand, and you want to be clear and moderate. So how then do you increase the results of your generosity? Well, we talked about the freedom from the 3 spheres, it's called. Yourself, really firmly believing in a self, believing in the isness or selfness identity of a truly existing object, and then the recipient, you have a sense of emptiness about them. And that's the 3 spheres. And, so it's a sense that the giver, the gift, and the recipient are all illusory. And you're giving with the purpose of establishing sentient beings ultimately in enlightenment. So even when you're giving to the food bank and so forth, that's the way you're thinking. And you're giving without attachment and no expectation of results. So you're not expecting result. You're giving to that purpose, and then you let go. And then you dedicate it. Every time you give something to unsurpassable, perfect, complete enlightenment. And that causes the results of this giving, act of giving, to become inexhaustible. And so what's the result? What's the point of all this? Ultimately, one achieves enlightenment. And you can read, if you have many books behind me on the story of the Bodhisattva, Tara, when she was a Bodhisattva. And her story, what she did was give. Eon, lifetime after lifetime after lifetime, she practiced generosity. And that is the main story of how Tara achieved awakening. If you love Tara, and if you don't love Tara, you should learn about Tara, then you want to give and give. And then what will really happen is if you give without thinking about getting anything back, then it does result in wealth in some future lifetime that will ripen for you if you remain in the realms of sentient beings. And you can gather trainees to share the Dharma with if you practice generosity. And you can make a connection between them and their eventual enlightenment. And those are the main points. There's specific promises, but I think more fitting for the modern day is by giving fearlessness, you'll gain a sense of power and unassailability. And by giving Dharma teachings, you'll meet the Buddha swiftly, accompany him, and achieve all you desire. What does that even mean? Meet the Buddha swiftly. Maitreya Buddha will be back eventually as the next Buddha. And maybe I can meet Maitreya Buddha. And then all your obscurations will be dispelled from this kind of generosity. And if you don't practice generosity, then you can fall to lower realms, especially the hungry ghost realms. So ghosts as a whole thing in Buddhist societies, it differs a little bit from our societies and our conception of ghosts. Ghosts is like another rebirth, it's viewed as. It's not just, I don't know how we even view it in our society. It's very muddy in our society, isn't it, what exactly a ghost is? Someone who lingers after they die and is still a personage. But here, actually, they've entered another kind of body, is the feeling. They've been reborn as ghosts. And you'll see these in the stories of children who remember past lives, that they became spirits wandering from place to place, looking for a new body, food, and so forth, searching, hungry, wanting. That kind of feeling comes from a lack of generosity. So if you practice generosity, enlightenment becomes much easier, and that's the ultimate purpose. So, all right, well, I didn't give you a practice. I still haven't figured out how to incorporate a practice session in our time together since I changed to a half-hour format. But I think actually your practice of this one involves giving, and we can't not sitting on our butts. So nice to see you, whoever you were listening to, and anybody else who's listening, please like and subscribe. It really helps the channel. And if you're interested in my teaching, particularly on Vajrayana topics, you can sign up go to the mayummountain.net website, MAYUM mountain. .net website, and sign up for our email list for our nonprofit Buddhist church. Alrighty, well, you have a great week, and I'll see you next week when we'll talk about the second paramita, or perfection. Bye now.